What do you say to a woman with 2 black eyes?" asked Michael. "I don't know. Can I get you some ice?" replied Patrick. "Shall I call the police?" asked Bobby Hunt. "You don't say anything. You've already told her twice," Michael said with a grin. Patrick looked at Bobby, then shook his head. Bobby's eyes reflected his disgust. "Really? This joke?" thought Patrick to himself. Ever since Patrick met Tiffany James, he'd lived in the shadow of her absentee father. Everything Patrick did, her daddy could do better. Any accomplishments of Pam's daughter were ridiculed. Any attempts to befriend the girl were thwarted. Any attempts by Patrick to soften the girl's icy demeanor were rejected. 7 years of putting up with her is over, thank God, Patrick consoled himself as he sipped his beer. "What's this about, huh?" shouted Michael, trying to be heard over the loud music. "Drink! Drink! It's a bachelor party!" Bobby thanked his future father-in-law by drinking his Jack and Coke, but Patrick paid him no attention. He focused on one of the big screen televisions showing highlights of the college games. The screen displayed the final score of a game between Missouri River State and Mindy, with Missouri River State beating Mindy 8-7. The Mindy Blue Jays were a tough team, and beating them in their own stadium was no easy feat. Patrick watched as the Blue Jays blocked a field goal attempt with 53 seconds left in the game, bringing the score to 6 for the Pioneers and 7 for the Blue Jays. The Pioneers kicker then moved the ball to the 3-yard line. The Blue Jays punted the ball away, and 5 Pioneers converged to take down the Blue Jay quarterback in his own end zone. "And that, Pioneers, oh Pioneers, is the way to do it," Patrick said as the Pioneers took a knee and played the match to the end. "Like I said Saturday, you beat her up, with a nice thick belt or a razor, whether she deserves it or not." Michael grinned. "Like that, she knows who's in charge." "Ask him how well it works," Patrick reminded Bobby. Michael looked grimly at the man who had married his ex-wife. "You hear you're getting married, honey?" cooed the dancer, putting her arm around Bobby's shoulders. "Tell him, honey. Tell him not to do that." Michael laughed. Patrick knew he wouldn't be walking Tiffany James down the aisle. That honor was reserved for Sean, her older brother, and Patrick was more than fine with that. Sean was a fine young man, the kind any mother and stepfather would be proud to call their son and stepson. 5 weeks ago, Pam excitedly reported that Michael had contacted his youngest daughter out of the blue. "Isn't that great, honey?" exclaimed Pam. "Just out of nowhere? Wow, that's something," Patrick agreed. He thought it was very frustrating for Michael that he couldn't help when Debbie, Pam's oldest child, was getting married. Pam's brother, Al, was the one who walked a radiant Debbie down the aisle. Al, who was diabetic and weighed 370 pounds at the time of Debbie's wedding, had deteriorated rapidly since then and was now lying in a hospital bed in his Chicago home. He would not be attending his youngest niece's wedding. After learning that Tiffany's father would be walking her down the aisle, Bobby quickly asked Sean to be one of his groomsmen. Bobby also extended the invitation to Patrick. He genuinely liked Patrick, as did Debbie and Sean. Berted Bray. Tiffany, however, protested loudly and vehemently against Patrick Davis being part of the wedding ceremony. "Bobby, thank you, but I consider it an honor to accompany the beautiful mother of the bride," Patrick said generously to the young man. If Tiffany had objected, Patrick wouldn't have insisted, but the girl kept her mouth shut. After all, it was her mother and stepfather who had paid for this elaborate wedding. Michael needed to borrow money for a ticket to Chicago. Pam even suggested that she and Patrick invite Michael to stay at their house, but Sean was quick to intervene and suggested that his father stay at his apartment. As they were being fitted for their morning suits and hats, Patrick learned that he was to pay for the rental of outfits for his wife's ex-husband. "And this perpetually unemployed, chronically lazy asshole suddenly shows up?" Patrick asked Pam. Pam ignored Patrick's question. When he rolled over in bed and tried to make love, she coldly brushed him off. "You need a drink," Michael yelled in Patrick's ear, bringing him out of his reverie. "Dude, do you need to yell in my ear?" shouted Patrick. "Come on, drink up," shouted Michael. "Dad, let's go," Sean said. "Are they real?" asked Michael. barely had the ink dried on his doctoral degree from Missouri River State University when Patrick Davis attended an engineering conference in Chicago, Illinois. Armed with several copies of his resume in his briefcase and a cover letter ready to be customized on his laptop, the 26-year-old networked diligently. Despite his PhD, he realized he still had a lot to learn. Admitting this to a fellow attendee led Patrick to an interview with Colfax Sewage and Water. Initially, he hadn't considered working in a small city. His ambitions aimed at Chicago, St. Louis, or another major metropolitan area. Most of Colfax is still living on septic tanks from the 50s and 60s, said Jack Warner. The transition to public sewer won't be easy, but it's a great opportunity for you to learn and grow. Patrick agreed. It would be a great opportunity. On his first day in the new office, Patrick met Pam, the vice president in charge of public relations and marketing. The 42-year-old woman greeted the newcomer warmly and wished him luck. Later, he ran into her in the dining room and politely asked if he could join her. He noticed the wedding and engagement rings she wore, but didn't bother to hide his attention. Patrick, standing 6 feet 1 inch tall, had entered college on a partial scholarship as a player for the Pioneers. After earning his bachelor's degree, he quit soccer and focused on graduate school, specializing in hydraulic engineering. He continued to exercise and diet, maintaining an athletic physique. He had worn his sandy blonde hair in a ponytail through his master's and doctoral programs, but cut it into a stylish buzz cut after graduating, donating his hair to the Locks of Love Foundation. His brown eyes were warm, his nose firm, and his smile, thanks to orthodontic braces, was even and white. He had refused his dentist's suggestion to remove his third canine, seeing no good reason for the extraction. "So, how long have you worked here?" Patrick asked Pam the next time their lunch breaks coincided. "Started? Oh my God, I'm embarrassed to tell you," Pam laughed. "Why?" asked Patrick. "Then you'll know how old I am," Pam admitted. Patrick noticed a few gray strands in her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. He also saw crow's feet beginning to form at the corners of her beautiful blue eyes. She had a thin nose and lips shaped like Cupid's bow. "I started working right out of high school while pregnant with Debbie, my oldest daughter. Jack's daddy, Chip Warner, really liked me and paid for me to go to night school," Pam said, leaning forward and giving Patrick an unobstructed view of her lacy black bra. The attractive brunette had soft, creamy skin. Patrick tried not to stare, but found it difficult. "But 24 years, 3 children, and 1 divorce later," Pam continued, and Patrick realized he'd been distracted, lost in her cleavage. "So, next year is your silver anniversary? Wow, that's really an accomplishment to be proud of," Patrick said. "So you were really paying attention," Pam muttered. Patrick blushed, smiled, and shrugged. 2 weeks after he started at the office, Pam made it clear that she wasn't married. The rings were just to keep the wolves at bay. She gestured to Patrick's left hand, subtly indicating her interest. "On top of that, I paid for those rings myself," Pam said. "The one my husband gave me had such a small diamond that I needed a magnifying glass to see it. And then it turned out it wasn't even real, just cubic zirconia. So I paid for these. I'm wearing them." She confessed that she'd caught Michael in bed with the girl they'd hired to tutor their youngest, Tiffany, in French. They'd gone to counseling, almost repaired the damage, and then Lori announced she was pregnant. "She was 3 months pregnant," Pam smirked. "And what's the problem? I caught them 5 months earlier. The only way she could have been 3 months pregnant is if they kept doing it." "So, if I invite you to House of May?" asked Patrick. "I'd say that's very flattering, but you need to find someone your own age," Pam said. Then began the weekly campaign. Despite using direct deposit, pay stubs were still delivered to the office in sealed envelopes. Patrick would bring his paycheck stub to Pam's office, bang on the door jamb, and show her his receipt. "Just got my paycheck," he'd say. "Want to turn on the fancy light?" She'd smile dazzlingly at him and shake her head. Then Tiffany threw one of her tantrums. She wanted to take horseback riding lessons, but Pam, as the sole breadwinner, was already paying the mortgage, the car, and Sean's tuition. "Call Dad. Maybe he can afford it," Pam suggested, while trying to put on her earrings and fit into her shoes. Ha ha, very funny, Tiffany quipped. What? Asked Pam. Pam didn't know it, but Michael had been fired from yet another job. Tiffany was sure her mother was just emphasizing what a loser her beloved father had been. Still reeling from the fight with her 14-year-old daughter, Pam clicked her mouse, watching the cursor move across the screen. There was a knock on the door. Hey, just got my paycheck, Patrick smiled, waving an envelope with a pay stub. Want to go lantern riding? You know what? She can look after herself, Pam said. Yeah, pick me up at 7:30. Their first meeting had not been very warm. Patrick knocked on the door, and the teenager opened it with a jerk. They stared at each other for a long time, him smiling, her eyes glittering. Hi, I'm Patrick Davis, he smiled. Is Pam ready? Getting no answer, Tiffany slammed the door shut. Mom, she shouted. Jesus, what? Shouted Pam back. Some loser at the door, Tiffany said. Find out what they want. If it's Patrick, tell him I'll be a few more minutes, Pam barked. No, Tiffany said and stomped off to her room. Patrick wondered if Pam might have given him the wrong address. He checked his phone, then remembered he hadn't asked for her number. Just as he was about to walk back to the car, the door swung open again. Hi, God. Sorry about that, Pam apologized as she opened the door. No problem. I get it. Patrick smiled. I was a teenager once, too. Uh-huh, Pam said, still upset by Tiffany's insufferable behavior. She poked her head back into the house and shouted up the stairs, Tiffany, I'm leaving. In her room, Tiffany heard her mom yelling something, but ignored it. An hour later, she got hungry and left her room. Mom? She called out. Mom? At the steakhouse, Pam laughed at the humorous story Patrick was telling about his first night of drinking. Apparently, you're not 21 until you risk alcohol poisoning, Patrick said. Really? The neighbor's cat? Pam giggled, then frowned as her cell phone rang. What? She hissed. What do you mean, what? Tiffany snorted. Where are you? I told you I had a date, Pam replied stiffly. A date? With that loser? Shouted Tiffany. Goodbye, Tiffany. I'm hanging up, said Pam. What about dinner? Shouted Tiffany. What am I supposed to eat? Eat cereal, said Pam. I'm hanging up. They continued talking and eating. Pam's phone rang twice more during the meal, and each time it was Tiffany. Pam ignored the calls. Tiffany picked up Pam's cell phone and blocked Patrick's number. Whenever Patrick showed up to ask Pam out, she would slam the door in his face without telling her mother he had been there. Eventually, Patrick helped Pam unblock his number and started calling as he pulled up in her driveway. When Tiffany slammed the door shut, Patrick would knock loudly until Pam answered. After their 5th date, they made love. Pam was very self-conscious about her 42-year-old body. Tiffany was furious about having to share breakfast with her mother's boyfriend. She stared at him hatefully throughout the entire meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast, responding to any comments or questions with stony silence. You should forgive her, Pam said, casting a dagger-like glare at her defiant daughter. She's a teenager. I was one once, Patrick agreed. What time is the basketball game tonight, Tiffany? Asked Pam. Tiffany didn't answer. I asked you a question, Pam said through clenched teeth. It's right here on the calendar, Tiffany snapped. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. If you weren't so busy with your boyfriend, maybe you'd know about it, huh? Pam, said Patrick, feigning shock, you have another boyfriend. Well, I guess someone can just stay home and not go to their game, Pam called out as she climbed the stairs. A moment later, Tiffany's door slammed shut. I think I'd better leave, Patrick said quietly. You two need to talk, don't you? Pam kissed him tenderly at the door. Then, when the sound of Patrick's car faded away, she started up the stairs. As their relationship progressed, despite Tiffany's unreasonable and unrelenting hostility, Patrick's role in the company grew. He was assigned the biggest project they had, North Lake Hospital. The main challenge, besides the sewer system, was draining the parking lot and the area around the 115-year-old building. Patrick designed and led the installation project. He surprised and delighted the hospital administration by managing the installation of the drainage system with minimal disruption to hospital operations. However, the resurfacing of the parking lot required using union labor, which added complexity to the project. Thanks to the employees and union bosses, the realization went off without a hitch. With the $12,000 bonus Jack Warner gave him, Patrick bought an engagement ring for Pam. During a romantic dinner at the Monticello restaurant, Patrick proposed, and she tearfully but happily agreed. Debbie and Sean were happy for their mother. Both met Patrick at Thanksgiving dinner and seemed to like him. They also tried to reason with Tiffany about Patrick and their mother's need for companionship. Tiffany was polite to Patrick and her mother during dinner, but as soon as she could, she retreated to her room. "Give her time," Sean said. "The kid just doesn't like to share," Debbie suggested. Debbie stayed with Tiffany while Patrick and Pam went on their honeymoon to the Grand Canyon. During their absence, Debbie tried to talk some sense into Tiffany. Sean visited often and also tried to convince her to give Patrick a chance. Tiffany stubbornly refused, unwilling to accept Patrick as part of the family. "Look, Tiffany, I know you're too young to remember all those tears, Daddy cheating on Mommy," Debbie snapped at her. "Because it never happened," Tiffany retorted. While dating Pam, Patrick could leave when Tiffany's bitterness became unbearable. But being married and living in the same house with her, he had nowhere to escape. His car and Pam's car became the cleanest in the neighborhood, as Patrick washed, cleaned, and vacuumed them whenever Tiffany's behavior became too confrontational. Their garden became the envy of the neighbors. When he ran out of things to wash or wax, he would start weeding the garden. He learned how to mulch, which flowers bloomed when, and cleared the cluttered front yard. Pam couldn't bring herself to put Tiffany in her place. She didn't side with the girl, but she wouldn't side with Patrick either. Then the rain came. It wasn't a light drizzle that quickly evaporated, nor a heavy downpour that soon dried up. This rain continued for almost 4 days in a row, a steady, unceasing torrent that relentlessly poured down. In 91 hours, 38 inches of rain fell on Colfax, Missouri. The ground became saturated, and when the rain had nowhere to run off, the streets turned into rivers. Low-lying houses flooded, and residents had to be rescued. North Lake Hospital's parking lot turned into a lake. Supplies had to be airlifted in, no patients could leave, and no new patients could be admitted. Patrick Davis took the brunt of the blame for the malfunctioning drainage system at the hospital. Pointing out that no one's drainage system worked during the rainstorm did little to appease the hospital administration. Colfax Water and Sewage shrugged sympathetically, but ultimately fired Patrick. Tiffany's face lit up with joy when she heard about Patrick's dismissal. She wasted no time in reminding her mother that now Patrick, once the breadwinner, was just an unemployed freeloader, leaving Pam to support him. Patrick found himself out of work far longer than he had expected. Weeks turned into months as he diligently searched for a new job. Throughout this time, Tiffany continued her barrage of insults and snide remarks, and Pam never once defended him. If Pam ever denied Tiffany's requests, Tiffany blamed Patrick for their financial woes. In St. Angelo, Illinois, a nascent public water system project presented Patrick with an opportunity. It involved forming an irrigation cooperative to serve the entire rural community. The job was in the public sector, so the annual salary was nearly $7,000 less than his previous position. Nevertheless, it was steady employment. Like you're the one who made it rain, huh?" Bert Yates quipped when Patrick candidly explained the circumstances of his firing. "I agree, but I was the one who designed the drainage system," Patrick affirmed to the county commissioner. The commute now required 2.5 hours each way, but Patrick humorously remarked that it was 5 hours a day he didn't have to endure Tiffany's outbursts. Tiffany herself seemed to acknowledge this, as their confrontations were mostly confined to weekends. Due to the long drives, Patrick opted to purchase a modified Harley-Davidson Fat Boy lowrider. It was more fuel-efficient and enjoyable to ride in favorable weather conditions. Pam strongly disliked the bike, citing its noise and perceived danger. Patrick even joked that he might consider selling the Harley once Pam found a way to get rid of Tiffany. Pam also argued that the Harley constituted an unnecessary expense given Patrick's reduced salary. Any savings on fuel were offset by higher insurance costs. He finally persuaded Pam to hop onto the back seat of the motorcycle, and they set off for a ride. Starting off cautiously, he rode slowly to let her adjust to the bike. Gradually, he increased their speed. On the highway, he had no choice but to open the throttle to its fullest and race down the road. After safely returning to their suburban home, Pam didn't waste any time. She didn't wait for them to pull out of the garage. Meanwhile, Tiffany graduated from high school and entered adulthood. She excelled academically, earning academic scholarships from 5 colleges and athletic scholarships from 2 colleges due to her basketball skills. Patrick fervently hoped Tiffany would choose Norman College in Low Ridge, Texas, or the University of Louisiana at DeGard, both far from home. To influence her decision, he even mentioned that Missouri River State, his alma mater, was conveniently close in Colfax. Harvesters College, also in Colfax, offered another option where she could stay home rather than live independently. Much to Patrick's surprise and dismay, Tiffany decided to enroll at Missouri River State after all. With a chuckle, she assured Patrick that his affiliation with the school played no role in her decision. "It's probably because of Bobby," Pam suggested. "I don't know who this Bobby guy is, but I hate him," Patrick grumbled to himself. However, after meeting Bobby Hunt, Patrick's feelings toward the young man changed. In fact, he found himself liking Bobby. Bobby, in turn, seemed to reciprocate the sentiment. The two men even belted out the Pioneers' fight song together in the living room, each trying to outdo the other. "It's a man thing, honey," Pam giggled, watching Patrick and Bobby sing. "Next thing you know, they'll start pulling each other's fingers." "Hey, Bobby, pull my finger, huh?" Patrick quipped. "Of course, Pioneer. Oh, Pioneer." Bobby responded with a chuckle, extending his finger towards Patrick. "That's enough, you two," Tiffany interjected sharply. "Remember courtship? It's the best thing in life," Patrick teased Bobby. "What? What does that mean?" Tiffany snapped at Patrick. Fast forward 3 years, and Patrick found himself sitting in a bar with Bobby, Sean, and a few others from the groom's company, along with Tiffany's father. Patrick genuinely welcomed Bobby's proposal to Tiffany. Despite their rocky past, Tiffany was elated as she proudly showed off her engagement ring, even managing a hesitant thank you to Patrick when he congratulated her. Patrick wisely kept his distance, understanding that Pam and Tiffany were calling the shots for the wedding arrangements. The only suggestion Patrick dared to make was that they wait until after college to tie the knot. Tiffany's response was a cutting remark about him meddling in her affairs, followed by a disapproving look from Pam. "No, you're right," Patrick acquiesced before quietly exiting the room. "Better marry him now before he figures out what a hateful little shit you really are," Patrick muttered under his breath as he closed the door to the master bathroom. When Michael miraculously reached out for his baby, both Pam and Tiffany couldn't contain their excitement. "Wow, that's really something," Patrick remarked casually. "Unexpected, huh?" Upon meeting Michael, Patrick wasn't initially impressed. Michael and Pam had raised 3 handsome young men, each seeming to possess good judgment. Tiffany, while intelligent, didn't always show the same level of practicality. The first time Michael visited, Pam wore a red dress that Patrick had only seen twice before, once at Christmas and again at their office holiday party. "I remember this from Christmas," Patrick commented as Pam emerged from the closet. The next occasion was on their wedding anniversary. "I remembered how much you loved that dress," Pam smiled, meeting Patrick at the House of May restaurant. "Happy anniversary to me." Patrick chuckled in agreement. Now she slipped into the dress, grumbling about the few extra pounds she had gained since the last time she wore it. "Where are we headed?" Patrick asked as Pam hopped around, struggling to put on her shoes. "Tiffany, Michael, and I are meeting to discuss the wedding," Pam replied. "What should I wear?" Patrick gestured to his usual office attire, pants and a shirt. "Honey, Tiffany's father will be there," Pam said, meeting Patrick's gaze. She lightly kissed him on the lips. And let's be honest, she muttered, you're not Tiffany's favorite person. And that's the dress you're meeting your ex-husband in? Patrick raised an eyebrow. Let him see what he threw away, huh? Pam smirked. No, Patrick retorted sharply. He doesn't need to see what he threw away. He knows what he lost. Ignoring Patrick's protests, Pam hurried out of the room. Moments later, the garage door slammed shut. With Pam absent to voice her objections, Patrick decided to visit the Rooster Pool, a gentleman's club, where he indulged in a half-pound hamburger with onion rings, atomic fries, and a cold draft beer. The strawberry blonde dancer on stage exuded confidence, her movements accentuating her allure. Anything else, cowboy? Asked an attractive Asian-American waitress with a friendly smile. Do you have any more peppermint pie? Patrick inquired. Even after savoring a large slice of peppermint pie and 2 mugs of freshly brewed coffee, Patrick returned home before Pam and Tiffany. He watched some television, finding nothing particularly captivating. Pam eventually arrived home without Tiffany, and she was in a determined mood. Shedding her dress, she was left only in thigh-length stockings and tiny lace panties. Initially, Patrick considered resisting Pam's advances, but the sight of her in stockings and panties dispelled any thoughts of restraint. Over the following weeks, Pam, Tiffany, and Michael convened more frequently to plan the wedding. Each time, Pam dressed meticulously, applying her makeup with extra care. Dinner meetings often stretched into late hours, with Pam sometimes returning home well past 10:30 or 10:45. The one occasion Patrick had joined them had been a notably uncomfortable affair. Pam, Tiffany, and Michael had conversed intensely, pointedly excluding Patrick from their discussions. Twice during dinner, Patrick attempted to interject his thoughts or suggestions, only to have Pam squeeze his hand tightly. Patrick, honey, Michael's speaking, she whispered. And Michael's mistaken, Patrick muttered under his breath. We've already signed with Anne-Marie's floral design. Patrick received a reproachful glance from both Pam and Tiffany when he inquired about Bobby's absence. After all, it was Bobby's wedding. The smirk Michael shot his way ignited a core of anger within Patrick. Unlike previous occasions, Pam showed no inclination for intimacy after the dinner meeting. However, she did make it clear to Patrick that his presence and interruptions were unwelcome. Don't worry, it won't happen again, Patrick shrugged, though he felt a pang of disappointment. He knew winning Tiffany over was an impossible task. In the eyes of a spoiled child, he could never measure up to her father. Strangely, it seemed he was also trying to win over Pam, trying to match Michael James, and Patrick couldn't compete in his wife's eyes. During one of the dinner meetings, just before the bachelor party, Pam called Patrick on his cell phone. Honey, in the desk, in the top drawer, can you check if we ordered for 50 or 60 people? She asked. Patrick walked to her home office, opened the desk drawer, and found the contract she referred to. Reading the contents aloud to her, he replied with a nonchalant, "Uh-huh," as she thanked him cheerfully. Beneath the bill for Tiffany's wedding dress, Patrick discovered an astonishing sum. Below the bill for the mother of the bride's dress, beneath the catering contract, lay an invoice and statement from a private investigator. Reading the report, Patrick learned that Pam had hired the firm to locate Tiffany's father. It had taken them 4 days. Pam had very little information about the man. Michael James apparently believed that a computer was sufficient for watching adult content and had no social media presence. He's socially inept, too, Patrick muttered to himself as he microwaved dinner. Why would Pam lie? Michael didn't just reappear. She went searching for him, Patrick mused to himself. The evening of the rehearsal and subsequent dinner was an exercise in diplomacy for Patrick Davis. If the dinner meeting and bachelor party had seemed pompous to him, the rehearsal and subsequent dinner reinforced his impression. At the rehearsal dinner, Tiffany, Pam, and Michael were seated with Bobby, Bobby's stepfather and mother, and Bobby's stepmother and father. Their table was slightly elevated above the others. Patrick found himself at a table with Pam's daughter-in-law, Meg Wooten, and Meg and Al's daughter, Bernice. Bernice had Down syndrome, ate heartily, and insisted on conversing with Patrick while chewing her food. Debbie and Sean apologized to Patrick for the seating mix-up. "I honestly thought you'd be at the main table," Sean muttered, glancing toward the elevated seating. "I don't want to be there," Patrick stated loudly. "Apparently, there's no room for me." He clapped Sean lightly on the shoulder. "Make sure your mom gets home, okay?" he added before walking out of the restaurant. Sean tried to reprimand his mother for the rude behavior displayed by her, Tiffany, and Michael. "And sticking him with Bernice," Sean said, his voice filled with contempt. "Seriously? She's my cousin, and even I wouldn't want to sit with her." "Honey, it's Tiffany's dinner," Pam said weakly. "I had nothing to do with the seating." "But you saw what was happening and should have done something," Sean snapped aback. In front of her house, Sean looked at Pam, and silence stretched on for several minutes. "May I remind you that I'm your mother?" Pam retorted, feeling ashamed of her inattention. "And you don't act like it," Sean replied. "I'll make it up to him after the wedding," Pam said defensively. "I don't see how you can," Sean replied. "Just a few more hours and it will be over," Pam said, heading for the front door. The next morning, Patrick stayed out of the way of Tiffany, the hairdresser, the attendant, and Pam, all of whom were running around, yelling and whining. He drank a cup of coffee and ate a bagel on the back porch, staying out of the chaos. "Honey," exclaimed Pam, opening the door, "you're not even dressed? The wedding's at—" "It takes me 5 minutes to get dressed," Patrick replied. It actually took 9 minutes. There were pins stuck in everything, and Patrick made sure he removed them all before he got dressed. Then he sat and waited for almost an hour. Just as he was about to take off his shoes and coat, the photographer insisted on taking a few shots with the bride and the bride's mother. Either the photographer didn't notice, or she had already taken what she wanted from Tiffany. But there was no comment on Patrick's clearly extended middle finger when he posed with Tiffany. "Smile, sir. It's almost over," the photographer joked as Patrick stood with a beaming Pam. "Yes, it is," Patrick agreed, smiling sadly. The limo delivered them to the chapel. Patrick got out, ignoring Michael, Tiffany, and Pam. When Michael moved to help Pam from the back seat, Patrick forcefully elbowed him aside. "My wife, not yours," he muttered, glaring at him. "Honey, please," Pam growled at Patrick. The photographer asked them to smile, and they did, but the smiles looked more like grimaces. Inside the building, the photographer again asked them to smile. Both controlled their emotions and complied. Patrick nodded to Bobby and looked around the building. "Beautiful job on this place," Patrick praised. "Indeed," Pam agreed. "Hey, watch my hat, huh?" Patrick said, stepping away from the bench. "Honey, it's about to start," Pam complained as the music reached a climax. "And I'm about to pee on my leg," Patrick said. "Just watch my hat, huh?" He quickly headed toward the front of the church, then stepped out into the hallway just as the first bridesmaids and groomsmen began walking down the aisle. He took one last look around, and then went outside. His motorcycle was parked where he had left it the night before, under a tarp. Patrick had driven it there after a bad rehearsal dinner and then taken an Uber home. He pulled off the tarp, took the keys out of his pocket, and started the bike. Inside the church, the organ music drowned out the roar of Patrick's Harley as he drove away. Pam was not smiling and was quite annoyed with her husband when the doors opened, revealing her daughter in Michael James's arms. Patrick should have been there with her, celebrating this moment. At the house, Patrick disentangled himself from the rented outfit, carefully placed it back in its plastic pouch, and then sent Pam a text message reminding her to bring home his hat. Patrick rolled the 4 suitcases up to the front door. He had packed them while everyone else fussed about trying to get ready for the wedding. He smiled, strained. Tiffany had borrowed the suitcases and packed them for her and Bobby's honeymoon in Barbados. Those were his suitcases. He'd had them since before he and Pam started dating. Pam had no right to give Tiffany permission to take them. Tiffany hadn't even bothered to ask Patrick, but had simply turned to her mother. Patrick neatly stacked all the contents on Tiffany's bed. He didn't do anything to the clothes, didn't mess with Tiffany's makeup, and didn't even touch the birth control pills. Patrick looked around one last time. He picked up the framed photograph from Pam's wedding that adorned his dresser. He clutched it under his arm as he walked down the stairs. Then, Patrick decided he didn't need it. He didn't need a reminder of his failure. He placed it face down on the kitchen table, setting it on the chair he usually sat at. "Goodbye, Pam," he said to the empty house, then rolled the suitcases to his truck. The bike was already on the trailer. Patrick checked everything again, then made sure the front door was locked and the alarm was on. He dropped the house keys in the front door mailbox and walked down to his truck. "Take care," said Old Man Carmichaels, walking slowly past with his ancient beagle. "Same to you, sir," Patrick said. St. Elizabeth Parish Water and Sewage hired Patrick after a phone interview conducted on the recommendation of Bert Yates. He was also hired by the University of Louisiana at DeGard to teach a graduate course on irrigation systems. St. Elizabeth's Trauma Center did not seem to know about Patrick's failure with North Lake Hospital's drainage system. Patrick was commissioned to design the system as part of the hospital's expansion. Joe Goday was a good man, and he too had a modified Fat Boy, a lowrider a year older than Patrick's. Brian Brough, Patrick's immediate supervisor, was a quiet, brooding man. Patrick saw a fair amount of sadness in his eyes. Patrick didn't bother to ask Brian what the point of his story was, and Brian didn't ask Patrick what his story was. The Dead End Bar had cold beer and some of the most delicious plate lunches Patrick had ever tasted. The girls who twirled and danced on the small stage were amazing and real beauties. In the evenings, Sweet Pea served a hearty meal that made Patrick groan with pleasure as he struggled to finish the delicious dishes. He jokingly asked a very large woman if the cook was available. The woman gave him a hard look and then smiled. "They're both unmarried girls, I take it. If you marry one, you'll have to take the other," she said. "Well, Mom, I don't think I'm man enough to take them both," Patrick said. "That's for sure," the woman grinned and greeted the new arrival. Patrick took off his wedding ring the night before Tiffany's wedding. Pam hadn't noticed that he wasn't wearing the ring. It was now lying in a dresser drawer, hidden from view. It wasn't visible, but even as it lay under the sweaters in the drawer, Patrick thought about that ring. Apparently, he and Pam were still married. When he left Colfax, Missouri, he left no address, but he also made no attempt to conceal his whereabouts. Patrick Davis often wondered why he hadn't been man enough to win Pam away from Michael James. Michael had lied to Pam, cheated on her constantly, spent most of her money, and then shirked all responsibilities to her and their children. Yet, Pam had spent almost $4,000 to track this man down. When he came back to town, Pam seemed to want to spend every possible minute with this scraggly sociopath. She resented Patrick's intrusion and certainly didn't like his opinion of Michael. After finishing his stuffed pork chops, Patrick paid the bill, left a tip, and returned to his one-bedroom apartment. His father once remarked that, as a laborer moving from field to field, he could pack up his entire apartment in 30 minutes or less when he had to move to his next job. Looking over his meager belongings, Patrick figured it would take him just as long to pack. "Maybe if I stopped to make a sandwich," Patrick thought, turning on the small lamp over the small dining table. He was grading the thesis of one of his students. "Uh-huh, Louise. If you do that, you'll contaminate your water with paddlefish," Patrick thought, circling the offending paragraph. "We can't just look at where the water comes from. We have to look at where that water is going to go." He found a few more glaring problems in the girl's proposal and circled them. Then, using a red pen, he wrote detailed comments about each problem and why he would not approve her thesis. Patrick knew that Louise Proust would protest loudly, angrily defending her position. He also knew he would point out that her arguments were better suited for a different forum. Then, she would likely take her complaint to Dean Melanson. If that decrepit old fart really did have a backbone, Louise would go to Dean Sims. But Miss Louise Proust did not rewrite her dissertation or accept Patrick's critical remarks. It seemed she was determined to remain stubborn and combative. Exhausted, more by inner turmoil than physical exertion, Patrick went to bed. As on most nights, he wondered if he could have done otherwise. "One thing you can do is start taking action," Patrick said aloud. "Stop wondering when she's going to sue you. Let her sue you." But Patrick knew he wouldn't do that. As he had expected, Miss Proust was furious that he had not accepted her thesis. Patrick was even amused when she pointed out that she had double-spaced her work, ensured the pages were properly tabulated, and set the margins correctly. "Louise," he sighed. "Miss Proust," she snapped back. "Never mind," Patrick said, which only angered her more. "This isn't about your formatting. I'm taking issue with the sloppiness of your work. For our..." Dean Melançon read her thesis, reviewed Patrick's notes, and acknowledged the validity of his critiques. He refused to accept Louise's work. Dean Sims also reviewed her thesis and Patrick's notes, and suggested she redo her work. "Miss Proust," he sighed, "I'm no expert on irrigation, but even I can see the flaws in your work. Redo it and resubmit it." Patrick nodded approvingly when Dean Melançon and Dean Sims informed him of their decisions. Despite the support, he was still in a foul mood as he rolled into his office at St. Elizabeth's Water and Sewer. "Hey, Davis," Joe greeted him as Patrick started up his computer. "Hi," Patrick replied, typing in his password. "Is this a conference for engineers in Chicago?" Joe asked, pressing the issue. "It's about time, yeah, it's definitely time," Patrick said, glancing at the calendar on his desk. "I went last year, Brian the year before," Joe said with a knowing smile. "So now it's your turn in the trenches." Patrick recalled that it was at this convention where he met Jack Warner. Meeting Jack Warner led Patrick to Colfax Plumbing Systems, and being in Colfax introduced him to Pam. Joe smiled, remembering the sequence of events. Bert Yates had called him, saying Jack Warner was interested in Patrick. Jack Warner then contacted Joe, expressing his desire for Patrick to attend the convention. "We have a head of public relations and marketing? Worthless since Patrick left," Jack admitted. "Patrick is the best engineer we have, but you can see something is eating him up," Joe agreed. Patrick looked up from the schematics he was working on for the new recycling plant proposed for Kimball, Louisiana. The look on Joe Godet's face made him realize this was about more than just a convention. "No," Patrick said, turning back to his schematics. "What?" Joe stuttered, genuinely shocked. "I'm not going to this convention," Patrick repeated, not looking away from the screen. "Send Brian, send Tim, send anyone but me." "Listen up," Joe snapped, genuinely angered by Patrick's refusal. "You insist on staying put? You'll get my resignation in the morning, Joe," Patrick sighed. "I've already sent the specs to Brian Brose." "You're going to quit?" Joe exclaimed indignantly. "Yes," Patrick sighed again. Joe stormed out of Patrick's office. He knew that if he stayed another minute with the defiant subordinate, he might say or do something he couldn't take back. Still fuming, he called Jack Warner. "I was really hoping to send Pam there, so they could be together again," Jack sighed. Joe said nothing, thinking Pam Davis must be having a hard time if she wanted such a miserable, stubborn man. "Please try to convince him," Jack pleaded. "If only he could see. I'm afraid she'll do something sooner or later." Joe took a drive around the DeGard neighborhood to clear his head. Finally, with a clearer mind, he returned to the office. "Patrick," Joe said in a calm, even tone, "look, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go to the convention. You've been there before. You know the drill, and as our best and brightest engineer, you'll be able to figure out exactly what we need here at St. Elizabeth's. Okay?" "No, Joe, no." Patrick sighed and took a screenshot of his work. He looked at his slowly blushing superior. "No, Joe. Send me anywhere but Chicago, okay? Send me to hell if you want, but I absolutely refuse to go to Chicago," Patrick said quietly. Oakleaf County, Texas was in the early stages of designing and constructing a wastewater treatment plant. Patrick Davis was the engineering supervisor and often arrived at work before most of the midnight shift had left. By the time the day shift started, he was usually still sitting at his desk. Although he ate lunch every day in the employee cafeteria, he sat alone at noon. Patrick did not discourage employees from sitting with him, but he did not encourage them either. Every day at 4 p.m, he would go to the cafeteria, make himself a cup of coffee, then sit down, eat an apple, and drink his coffee. Hey, Davis, Jason, the chief operating officer, called out one afternoon at 12:10. Yes, sir? Patrick asked, looking up from his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Boy, I know what your paycheck is, Jason joked, eyeing Patrick's simple meal. I know we pay you enough to eat better than this. But do you pay me enough to make me want to? Patrick replied, a rare smile appearing on his face. You taught at DeHart University, right? Jason asked, sitting down at the table. University of Louisiana at DeHart, Patrick corrected. Yeah, graduate school in irrigation systems and implementation. Why? We had a student, let's see, Miss Proust? Louise Proust? Jason asked. Oh, good, Patrick groaned. Of course you did. Anything good? Jason inquired. Tell you what, Fasterling, Patrick said, picking up his sandwich again. Have Miss Proust send you her supposed dissertation. Read it and let me know. At 4 p.m, Jason found Patrick back in the cafeteria, sinking his teeth deeply into an apple. Good Lord, no, Patrick grinned. This is nothing but 100% authentic Texas coffee. Thank you very much. Okay. Never could understand why someone would want to ruin such a great thing, Jason said, making himself some coffee. The man sat down next to Patrick again, and they sipped their coffee in silence. Then Jason sighed and looked at the spot over Patrick's shoulder. Read this girl's thesis, Jason repeated. She's worthless. But it's formatted correctly, Patrick smirked. What? Who cares? Jason asked, taken aback. But she has other criteria we need. How about we put her in the inventory department? Suggested the operations director. What? You mean we're hiring her? Patrick asked in surprise. Jason looked around the room. He decided that the 3 administrative assistants in the corner were too busy giggling to pay attention to them. He frowned as he looked at one of the trio, a young man with his hair arranged in a bouffant style. Jason leaned closer to Patrick. Adams has it in her head that we lack variety, Jason whispered. You told her I'm an African-American transgender lesbian, Patrick whispered back. I had my suspicions, Jason grinned as he drained his cup of coffee. Seriously, Jason said, standing up, if you don't count your class, she scored a 4. Let's see what she can do for us, huh? Louise Proust joined Oakleaf County Sewage Treatment in the inventory department. She spent her first day doing mountains of paperwork and reviewing the WebEx seminars that all new employees were required to take. It wasn't until the second day of work that she saw Patrick Davis. Patrick was shocked when the girl smiled broadly at him and waved hello. He did not respond to her smile, but he did wave back. Louise sat with several administrative assistants during lunch and seemed comfortable in their company. She didn't see Patrick again until it was time to leave the cafeteria. She smiled and waved at him again. Patrick nodded to acknowledge her and continued eating his pretzels. Oh, it's Vinny, Troy Lopez wheezed. I swear he's so unfriendly. Troy thinks anyone who hasn't fallen madly in love with him is unfriendly, one of the girls whispered loudly to Louise. I'm not even going to dignify that with a response, Troy said, stepping away from the table. Patrick watched this exchange and shook his head in mild disgust. He wondered if anyone would have the guts to tell Troy Lopez that he looked ridiculous with that bouffant hairdo. 2 weeks later, Troy Lopez was finally fired. The young man was hired as an administrative assistant, but whenever the job seemed too difficult, he simply ignored it. If he was given a deadline, Troy shifted the work to someone else. I love him like a brother, complained Mia Sanchez to Coretta Adams, the general manager of Oakleaf County Sewage. But somebody needs to tell that boy to do his own work. You know what I'm saying. After the firing of Troy Lopez, Mia and several other administrative assistants found mountains of papers on their desks. Due to Troy's laziness, a lot of things had piled up, and most of them required time to sort through. So, at noon, Louise Proust found herself alone in the cafeteria. She decided to sit at Patrick's table. She sat down, started eating her tuna salad, and began texting on her cell phone. That's rude, Patrick snapped after 10 minutes. Huh? Louise asked, finally tearing her gaze away from her cell phone screen. You didn't even ask if you could join me. You just sat yourself down, Patrick snarled. No, hey, how was your day? Nothing. You just pull out your phone and start texting someone else? If you're going to do that nonsense, why even sit here? You can text from any table in here." He got up and left the room before his anger took over, before he said something that could get him in trouble. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Patrick almost didn't go into the cafeteria. Then he reminded himself that he had every right to be there, every right to enjoy his apple and coffee. "Hello, Dr. Davis. May I sit down here?" asked Louise. "Sure," Patrick replied, managing a strained smile and taking a bite of his apple. "But you don't have to call me Dr. Davis anymore, just Patrick." The girl smiled, and Patrick marveled at how attractive she really was. In his class, Louise Proust had dressed as boringly as possible. She kept her blonde hair in a tight bun or a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. Her outfit was smart and fashionable. She wore a knee-length dark blue skirt paired with a pale yellow blouse. Her blonde hair cascaded down to her waist, styled loosely, and her makeup included light powder, eyeliner, and lip gloss. Patrick couldn't help but think that Troy Lopez was wearing more makeup than Louise at that moment. "So, when did you start working here?" Louise asked, sipping her coffee. "First week of June," Patrick replied. "I'm sure you had something to do with me getting this job," Louise whispered, looking at Patrick with warm brown eyes. Patrick gave her a wry smile. "Not really," he answered honestly. "A lot of it was due to the hard work you've done at ULD." She smiled proudly at his compliment, taking another sip of coffee and glancing at the apple Patrick was eating. "Where did you get the apple?" she asked, looking around the cafeteria. "From home," Patrick said. "Oh, where are you staying?" "I have an apartment, the the Oxbow on 72nd Street, Louise said. "I bought a condo, the East Lawn condos," Patrick replied. "East Lawn? Where's that?" Louise inquired. "On the other side of Oxbow Lake," Patrick explained. "From here, take a left on Marizelle, then another left on Tucker Drive." "So, you walk right past my apartment?" Louise noted. "Yeah, maybe I'll rev up the hog and wake you up," Patrick joked. "Your hog?" Louise asked, looking puzzled. "My Harley," Patrick clarified, finishing the last bite of his apple, along with the remainder of his coffee. "Do you still have one of those? I like the American flag coloring," Louise said. "Still got it," Patrick confirmed. She seemed like she wanted to say something more, but Patrick was already tossing back his coffee cup and disposing of the apple core. "See you later, Dr. Davis," Louise said as Patrick headed out. Later that day, Patrick had to coordinate a significant project, tearing out a section of Highway 72 and ordering 12-inch pipes to ensure they were ready for installation. The work would impact residents across Oakleaf County, necessitating careful logistics to have supplies ready at the job sites precisely when needed. 1 hour, just 1 hour delay, and we'll be in big trouble, Patrick emphasized as they finalized their project plans. "Ha ha, cute," Louise smirked. "What?" snapped Patrick. "Dip-to-dough," Louise chuckled. "We work at the sewage plant." "Miss Proust, there's a time for jokes and a time for seriousness. Guess which time this is," Patrick said sharply. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly brushed them away and clenched her jaws tightly. "Is the inventory ready to go?" he asked, shifting gears. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice shaking as she tried to regain composure. "Is the equipment ready?" Oh, Patrick turned to Pablo Resendez. "Yes, sir," Pablo affirmed. "Everything's loaded onto the trailers." "Have the permits come through?" Patrick questioned Jason Fosterling. "And in Pablo's hand," Jason assured Patrick. "And Miss Proust?" Patrick addressed her again. She looked up from her papers, her eyes still glistening and her nose flushed. "Yes, sir?" she asked cautiously. "Miss Proust, I apologize for coming down on you like that," Patrick said sincerely. "I understand you were trying to lighten the mood, and I took it the wrong way." Louise glanced around the room, noticing the nods of understanding from Coretta Adams, Steve Adams, the CFO, no relation to Coretta, Pablo, and Jason. "Thank you, Miss Proust," Patrick said as he gathered his papers. "So, we'll all reconvene tomorrow at 9:30 after the morning rush hour settles down a bit." Patrick swiftly exited the conference room before anyone could respond. He didn't regret reprimanding Louise. The situation was critical, time-sensitive, and any distractions could jeopardize their relationship with Oakleaf County residents. Many were already disgruntled about the recent sales tax hike and the sewage system upgrades. "Yeah, Pam taught me a few things," Patrick reflected with a strained smile. Picking up his helmet from the table, he and Pam had often discussed how a dissatisfied customer could significantly impact a business. "Every happy customer tells maybe 2 or 3 of their friends," Pam had observed, "but an unhappy one, they'll tell at least 10 people about it." Patrick did something unusual for him. He left the office early. He was still irked by Louise's earlier question about using a 12-inch pipe instead of an 18-inch one. "It's only a few pennies more per foot," Louise remarked, "and the volume is greater." "Miss Proust, when we're dealing with miles of pipeline, those few pennies add up to thousands of dollars," Steve Adams interjected calmly. "One more thing, Miss Proust," Patrick added, struggling to contain his frustration. "Surely you understand how pipe diameter affects pressure and flow velocity?" Instead of heading south on Highway 72, Patrick veered north, passing through Oakleaf without much notice of the trailer parks, shopping centers, and convenience stores along the way. He caught sight of Connolly College campus and the Cougar Stadium. Making a left onto Stadium Drive and then a right onto Connolly Way, he finally came to a rumbling stop in front of Tijuana Jack's restaurant. Tijuana Jack's boasted 3 virtues: ice-cold beer, Texas beautiful girls, and a flagrant disregard for Oakleaf County ordinances requiring dancers to cover certain parts. Patrick flashed his TJ pass to the doorman, who smiled and wished him a good day, opening the door to the squat building. On stage, a blonde danced to Pantera's Walk, playfully adjusting her panties as the song played out. She flashed a vacant smile as the next song started, striding across the stage in 5-inch heels. Another draw at Tijuana Jack was their half-pound hamburger served with a hefty portion of thick-cut fries dusted with cayenne. "Can I help you, buddy?" asked a grizzled man as Patrick settled onto a bar stool. "A draft and a burger with fries," Patrick ordered. "How do you want it cooked?" the man inquired. "Medium well," Patrick replied, though he expected it to come out well done regardless. The draft arrived promptly, and within minutes, the bartender placed a hefty platter before him. Patrick tore open a mustard packet, dipped the burger, and took a satisfying bite, a smile spreading across his face. "Enjoying that?" the bartender asked, chuckling. "Yeah," Patrick agreed, washing down his meal with the last of his beer. An Asian American girl with ample assets worked the room, trying to entice patrons into the tequila room for a 15-minute session. "How much?" Patrick asked, though he had no intention of going to the tequila room. "100 for the room and whatever you decide to tip the dancer," she whispered seductively in Patrick's ear. "And no one's ever complained," she added hotly. "Really? Is that so?" Patrick replied. He craved another mug of beer. He wanted to whisk away the blonde dancer who had been on the small stage when he entered the bar to the tequila room. There was a slight resemblance between her and Louise. Both were blondes, but in Patrick's embittered mind they shared the same label of worthlessness. Already, the blonde was guiding a delighted customer toward the private rooms. The only other dancer on the floor was an African-American woman. Patrick had no issue with African-American women, but her loud, grating laugh grated on his nerves. "I'll pass, sugar," Patrick told the Asian woman, slipping her a $5 bill. "Get yourself a drink, would you?" "Thanks, sugar." The girl smiled and turned her attention to the next patron. Hey, buddy," greeted the doorman as Patrick stepped outside. "Just got here, huh?" "Just need one of those burgers," Patrick said. "Burgers and fur burgers." "Heard that, buddy, heard that," the man chuckled, fist-bumping Patrick. Driving along Highway 72, Patrick spotted Louise pulling up to the Oxbow Apartments. He pretended not to notice her, assuming she hadn't seen him either, but she had seen him. Parking in her spot, she bowed her head and sat quietly for several minutes. Raised by a permissive mother and an absent father, and let down by an inadequate public education system, Louise Renee Proust had little preparation for the real world. She excelled in tests and possessed an exceptional memory. In college, many of her grades were concessions by professors worn out from arguing with her. She held a master's degree in mechanical engineering, but Patrick Davis's rejection of her thesis had halted her dreams of pursuing a doctorate. With her tuition funds dried up, she now faced the reality of needing a job. Once again, Louise found herself battling primarily against her own reputation. The few places that showed interest in her background had contacted professors at the University of Louisiana at DeHart. None had anything positive to say about Louise Proust. She argued incessantly in nearly every class about why she deserved an A. Even when you gave her one just to appease her, she'd spend the next hour arguing about the next assignment, sighed Dean Melançon when Clay Chopin from St. Elizabeth's Distillery inquired. Give her a C on her physics midterm. Next thing I know, I'm in Dean Sims' office facing a sex discrimination complaint. Professor Haxton snapped when King Sanity sought a recommendation. Louise continued to broaden her search radius, but the rejections kept accumulating. Oakleaf? Where's that? Queried Louise's mother. Texas, Louise replied, her cheerful mood fading momentarily. Bob always said there's no gravity in Texas, her mother smirked. Why don't people in Texas just float away? Texas sucks. Bob, Louise's absent father, had never been a part of her life, so his opinion of Texas held no weight for her. A quick search led her to secure a room in an apartment at Oxbow Apartments. Her roommate, Michelle Garcia, was a striking Latina. They split the rent of $750 along with utilities. Despite her attractiveness, Michelle was somewhat messy and had a tendency to argue even when Louise agreed with her. Is she your long-lost twin? Renee Proust joked when Louise called home to vent about Michelle. Michelle was also quite the libertine. It was rare for her to spend a night without company, and since their bedrooms were adjacent, Louise had no choice but to endure the sounds. Louise resolved that once their 6-month lease ended, she would not renew it with Michelle. Every dollar she saved was earmarked for buying a 1-bedroom apartment in the same complex. With a sigh, Louise exited her car and wearily ascended the metal stairs to their apartment. She was grateful not to hear Michelle's music blaring. Hi, Michelle greeted Louise cheerfully, drying her long black hair with a towel. Going somewhere? Asked Louise, noting the absence of any cooking smells. Yeah, Eddie's taking me to Casa Ole, Michelle replied, heading towards her room. As she turned, the towel slipped, leaving her momentarily exposed. This is my life, Louise muttered to herself as Michelle squealed and hurriedly covered herself with another towel before retreating to her room. Louise was munching on a ham and cheese sandwich when a flushed Michelle emerged in a dress barely reaching mid-thigh, slipping into slippers. Good night, Louise murmured softly. Yeah, Michelle whispered back. Their project wasn't without its challenges. Managing a project spanning such distances with numerous crews was bound to encounter hiccups along the way. During the first week, Patrick rode alongside Pablo or Jim Tucker, Pablo's right-hand man. In the second week, he led his own team, actively engaging with them when challenges arose instead of delegating to others. Patrick was on site, observing issues firsthand, and directly communicated needs to Jason when necessary. Patrick, you make everyone else look talentless, Jason complained. Oh, is that how it goes? Patrick quipped. Come on, Patrick, Jason insisted when Patrick requested couplings and valves. That's what we're paying Miss Proust for. Patrick was taken aback, but promptly dialed Louise's extension. Miss Proust, he greeted in a professional tone. Mr. Davis, she replied equally professionally. He conveyed his requirements, their location, and ended the call. Patrick was surprised when Louise arrived at the construction site, accompanied by a worker. She observed without interfering as the crew swiftly connected heavy pipes amidst the noisy machinery. Thank you, Miss Proust. I'm glad you came to see our challenges firsthand, Patrick acknowledged, and she visibly brightened at his praise. Approaching the trench, Louise peered into the ground to inspect their progress. She startled slightly when Patrick put his arm around her waist. Before you cry harassment, you're wearing office shoes, Patrick explained calmly. The ground here is loose, and I don't want you tripping and slowing us down." "That wouldn't hold us up," one of the crew joked. "We'd just bury it along with the pipe." "Yeah, she's from administration, not lacking in any way," another added, earning chuckles from the team. "Thanks, guys," Louise chuckled, then nodded approvingly at their work before stepping back. With a wave, she climbed into the truck, and the worker drove her back to the office. All the way, Louise felt a tingling sensation where Patrick's arm had rested around her waist. His scent lingered in her nostrils, the unmistakable odor of male sweat. From then on, whenever Patrick requested supplies, Louise ensured she personally delivered them to the site. Twice, when no one else was available, she took the initiative to drive pipes and elbow joints herself. Each visit, she sought progress updates. Each time, Patrick instinctively placed his arm around her waist, even though others offered to assist. "Thank you, Miss Proust," Patrick said gratefully as she turned to climb back into the semi's cab. "This is Louise," she smiled, lightly touching his bulging bicep. "Don't touch me, I'm covered in mud," he complained softly. "You?" she muttered mockingly, wiping and throwing her hand defiantly on his t-shirt. "Hey, boss, do you think she likes you?" one of the men asked as Louise pulled away. "Been in the sun too long?" asked Patrick, and the crew laughed. Patrick's chest was firm, his stomach taut. He looked rugged and masculine in his t-shirt, tight jeans, and work boots. "Doesn't look like Patrick at all," Louise thought. Patrick Longstreet was quiet, thoughtful, introspective. He dressed well, smelled of lavender or jasmine cologne, his hair styled in a fashionable bob with bangs that hung over his soulful eyes. Patrick took care of his skin, kept his nails well-groomed, and always had fresh breath. He could discuss politics, applauded Democrats for their efforts against Trump, and enjoyed watching the Discovery Channel, TLC, and CNN. When he drank, Patrick preferred white wine. He didn't smoke and rarely used drugs, and when he did, it was usually just a bit of cocaine. The few times they made love, Louise found herself almost falling asleep. His lovemaking was slow, deliberate, and somewhat boring. In short, Patrick was the perfect man on paper. He was everything Louise thought she wanted in a partner. And yet, Louise couldn't stand him. Michelle joked that if Louise ever decided to get rid of Patrick, she would gladly take him off Louise's hands. Louise climbed into the truck's cab and sent Michelle a text message. "Did you tell him I'm TS?" Michelle wrote. Louise replied, "No." She then sent Patrick a text message informing him that they would not be seeing each other again. However, she let him know that Michelle would be happy to hear from him. In typical Patrick fashion, he accepted the breakup. He hoped they could still be friends. In fact, he would have liked to call Michelle, but he feared it would be awkward, the three of them in the same apartment at the same time. "Don't worry about it," Louise thought to herself as she headed to her office. Patrick was sitting in his office on Friday, buried in the mountains of paperwork that had accumulated over his tenure. He looked up when there was a knock on the door. 12 o'clock. "Aren't you going to lunch?" she asked. "The line is usually a mile long by now," Patrick agreed. Then she pointed towards Benito's Pizza. "Benito's has a Friday night buffet," she offered. "Want to give it a try?" I'm on my Harley," he said. "Oh, well, I still want to ride," Louise said. He didn't smell like sweat when she leaned against him, but Patrick still had a distinct masculine odor. The ride to the pizzeria felt too short, and Louise even grumbled as she dismounted with shaky legs. She took off her helmet and shook out her long blonde hair. "That and railroad tracks. Who needs a man?" she muttered, and Patrick laughed. They ate far more than they should have, but when the sign says, "All you can eat, $7.99, one feels compelled to eat their fill. Patrick roared out of the parking lot and headed south. Louise clung tightly to his back, puzzled by the wrong turn he had taken. They jostled over the railroad tracks together, the vibrations coursing through them. Patrick maneuvered around in the gas station parking lot and promptly raced back across the tracks. "Are you all right? Or should I do that a few more times?" he teased. Louise burst into laughter, clapping him on the shoulder. Again, he stopped long before she was ready to. In the morning, Patrick left with a brief greeting to Louise before he departed. A minute later, Michelle entered the kitchen. Patrick glanced at his cell phone and noticed a Texas number. It was local, so he casually answered the call. He dreaded the day he might receive a call from Missouri. He had already blocked Pam, Tiffany, Sean, and Debbie's numbers on his phone, but he knew there was no guarantee they wouldn't find another way to contact him. "Hello?" Patrick answered. "I need a ride," Louise demanded. Patrick swept Louise up in his arms, and she nestled against his back contentedly as they rumbled down the highway aimlessly. The sun descended towards the west, casting a warm glow as Patrick pulled up outside a barbecue restaurant. Louise stretched her legs with a grin as she removed her helmet, and when Patrick removed his, she leaned in and kissed him on the lips. "Come Monday morning, I'm reporting you for harassment to Coretta," Patrick quipped. "Uh-huh," Louise giggled. "Ever been here before?" "Nope, but I'm starving," Patrick replied, holding the restaurant door open for her. "And don't tell me you're one of those vegans," he teased. "I tried, but it's too much work," Louise confessed. While waiting to be seated, Louise draped her arm around Patrick's lean waist, noticing the curious glances from the hostess. Over ribs, Patrick learned that Louise started college at 17 and entered graduate school at 20. "I would have been working on my doctoral dissertation, but some hard-headed professor rejected it," Louise lamented. "There were some good points in there. Maybe just tweak it like I suggested. Who knows?" Patrick encouraged. Their banter continued until the waitress brought the check. Patrick silenced Louise's protests with a kiss. "Shh, just relax," he murmured, placing his credit card on the bill. "Stop trying to prove you're tougher than me, all right?" Louise chuckled, thinking of Michelle, then shrugged. "Fine. Next one's on me," she declared. "A steakhouse next time?" Patrick suggested. "Sure, why not? Or maybe a stone grill," Louise pondered. They sped out of the parking lot, the sun warming their backs as Patrick steered east on his Harley. 40 minutes later, they arrived at Patrick's East Lawn condominium, where he showed her around, the sparse living room, uncluttered kitchen, and minimalist bedrooms. "Clearly, this place needs a woman's touch," Louise remarked, unimpressed. "Sorry, pharmacy's fresh out of estrogen patches," Patrick quipped. They made love. In the morning, Louise hurriedly packed her bag, barely acknowledging Patrick and Michelle on the couch watching TV. She dashed down the stairs, ready for the day. "Hungry?" Patrick asked as she hopped onto the Harley. "Starving," she admitted eagerly. "Mrs. Davis? There's—" Pam heard over the intercom. Then she heard DeLuise asking someone his name again. "Is Stephen Stewart here to see you?" DeLuise finished relaying the message. "It would have taken you 5 seconds to ask his name before calling me," Pam snapped irritably. "Yes, ma'am. Send him back." DeLuise's annoying, whiny voice grated on Pam's nerves. Pam squinted at her computer screen, relying on the calendar app. She hated to admit it, but she needed her glasses. Sean had shown her how to zoom in, but it still wasn't sufficient. Stephen Stewart was here. She had nothing scheduled until 4:30 in the afternoon, just an inter-office planning meeting. That meant management would gather to complain about their respective departments. Pam planned to bring up DeLuise's disorganized and unprofessional behavior. "Yes, send him back," Pam snarled. "Yes, ma'am," DeLuise replied. Pam couldn't be certain, but she thought she heard DeLuise mutter something just before the unusually loud metallic sound of the phone ringing interrupted. A forceful knock followed shortly after. "Yes," Pam called out, trying hard not to betray her irritation as the door swung open. "Are you Pam Davis?" asked a large man, poking his head inside before the door had fully opened. "Yes. And you are Mr. Stewart?" Pam rose to her feet. "Thank you. You've been served," Stephen Stewart said, handing Pam an envelope. The door closed, and Mr. Stephen Stewart disappeared. Pam stood holding a large manila envelope. Then she walked around her desk, sank heavily into her chair, and groaned softly. "Please, let it not be," she pleaded, continuing to moan. The divorce petition was straightforward. Patrick hadn't asked for a division of marital property or spousal support, despite Pam now earning nearly $12,000 more than him. Pam glanced at the letterhead, her heart leaping into her throat. Patrick Aaron Davis had hired Upjohn May and associates from Colfax, Missouri, a firm she often saw advertised on TV. "So he's here? He's back?" Pam nearly shouted with relief. "Hey, wash my hat, huh?" Patrick said as they sat in the front pew at the church. Supposedly, he had gone to the restroom. But as the 5 bridesmaids and the groom walked from the back of the church to the altar, Patrick didn't return. Pam kept turning her head, scanning the back and side aisles, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then Tiffany, her baby girl smiling proudly, slowly made her way down the aisle. Michael James, grinning smugly, held his daughter's hand. Pam couldn't believe she had cheated on her dear, sweet, handsome husband with bloated, scruffy Michael James. As she looked around for Patrick, Pam wondered what had possessed her to go with Michael James to the Roadway Motor Hotel. If she was honest with herself, Pam enjoyed flirting. She relished reminding Michael of what he'd given up, what he'd thrown away. Tiffany shared the same sentiment. Pam saw Patrick as an inconvenience, an intruder. His presence certainly spoiled her enjoyment of bullying Michael James. "Oh, that little wuss let you come alone tonight?" teased Michael the next time they met. Tiffany wasn't present this time. They went to the bar and had a few drinks. The jukebox played some George Jones tunes, and Michael pulled her onto the small dance floor. He still knew how to dance. Pam didn't kick Michael to the curb because of his dancing skills. Now, at church, her son Sean seemed to notice Patrick's absence as well. Even Bobby appeared a little concerned as he glanced directly at her. Pam sat through the seemingly lengthy and dry ceremony alone. She held Patrick's hat on the pew beside her, keeping a seat reserved for him. Then the wedding procession began down the aisle. Pam hoped and thought that perhaps Patrick had come out of the restroom, saw the wedding had already started, and, not wanting to disrupt the proceedings, had gone to the reception hall next door. "Miss Pam, where's Patrick?" asked Bobby. Pam couldn't provide an answer. She had no response for the disapproving looks from Debbie and Sean. Many guests knew she and Patrick were married, and that she and Michael were divorced, prompting questioning glances. But everyone was too polite to inquire about her husband's absence. "Mom, the photographer wants to take a picture of you and Dad dancing," Tiffany mentioned almost an hour later. "The photographer can go jump in the lake. She's not getting it," Pam snapped back. Finally, the seemingly endless festivities concluded. Debbie and Nicholas drove Pam home. Michael attempted to coax Patrick into the car, but Pam nearly caught his hand on the door as she slammed it shut. Sean determinedly steered his father toward their own car. Bobby and Tiffany also drove to Pam's house to retrieve their suitcases. The newlyweds faced an hour-and-a-half drive to the St. Louis airport, needing to arrive at least 2 hours early for their overseas flight. Pam burst into the house, leaving Debbie to turn off the alarm. She rushed upstairs and entered the bedroom. Her heart sank as she saw an open closet with an empty rod. The top 2 drawers of the dresser were partially open and devoid of contents. "Mommy!" Tiffany shouted at the top of her lungs. "What?" Pam screamed, tears blurring her vision. "That jerk! Where are our suitcases?" Tiffany yelled in frustration. Nicholas returned home to fetch his and Debbie's suitcases, a round trip taking an hour from Pam's house to his and back to Pam's again. Then Debbie, Bobby, and Tiffany hurriedly packed everything into their suitcases. An unfortunate accident with 3 fatalities on Highway 43 had caught Bobby and Tiffany off guard, resulting in them crawling along for nearly 3 hours. They arrived at the long-term parking lot 28 minutes after their flight had departed. As a result, Mr. Hunt and Mrs. James Hunt spent their first night as husband and wife at the Express Motor Lodge instead of in a hotel room in Barbados. The airline was understanding and waived the fees for rescheduling their flight. However, the hotel in Barbados charged them for the night, despite not using the room. 4 days after leaving St. Louis, Bobby Hunt returned to Missouri and instructed his father's attorney to file for an annulment. If the annulment wasn't possible, he would settle for a quick divorce. "Remember courtship? It's the best part of life," Patrick Davis told Bobby. Despite the rocky start to their honeymoon, Bobby hoped to still enjoy a tropical paradise, lounging in the sun with his bride on the beach and sharing passionate nights together. However, Tiffany's incessant complaints and nearly psychotic outbursts toward him, the staff, and other guests made the honeymoon unbearable. "You're turning our honeymoon into a nightmare. You know that," Bobby finally snapped. "Fuck you," Tiffany growled bitterly. "No, fuck you, Tiffany, I'm out," Bobby declared, grabbing the small suitcase allotted for his belongings and stuffing his clothes into it. Out of spite, determined to assert herself and show Bobby that she wouldn't back down, Tiffany stayed the full 2 weeks. She even turned off her cell phone. If Bobby wanted to apologize, he could leave a message on her voicemail. She wouldn't be there to take his call. Pam was at work, killing time, when Tiffany called her. "Mom, I'm at the airport," Tiffany said urgently. "I don't see Bobby anywhere." "No kidding, Tiffany. Really? You don't see him?" Pam shot back, her sarcasm dripping thickly. "No. Why? What's going on?" Tiffany asked, confused. $27,000 just went down the drain. That's what's going on, Tiffany," Pam said bitterly. "Huh?" Tiffany replied, bewildered. Tiffany waited until she landed at Chicago O'Hare, her transfer point before heading to St. Louis, to turn on her cell phone. There were no messages from Bobby. There was one message from her mother, a 3-second clip simply saying, "What did you do?" Upon landing at St. Louis Lambert Airport, Tiffany checked her phone again. Still no messages, no missed calls, no texts. She retrieved her 3 suitcases from the carousel, scanning the arrivals area for Bobby. He was nowhere to be seen. Sean had left work early to come pick up his sister. Stoically, he loaded the suitcases into the trunk of his car and settled into the driver's seat. Tiffany sat silently for a few minutes, seething with anger. Sean sighed when the toll booth attendant cheerfully asked for $2, turning to his sister. "Got $2?" he asked curtly. "What's with the attitude?" Tiffany snapped, shoving $2 into his hand. "Oh no, Tiffany, you're welcome," Sean retorted sharply. "I get the pleasure of leaving work 3 hours early, hours I won't get paid for, and wasting 5 gallons of gas to pick you up and bring you home. And then you can't even bother to pay a few lousy bucks for the ride? How about I swing by Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and treat you to a filet mignon? I'm sure you're hungry, right?" "Look, I was on my honeymoon, okay?" Tiffany shouted back defensively. He drove in tense silence for 20 minutes. Tiffany ignored him completely. "Congratulations, by the way," Sean said bitterly. "You're getting a divorce, you know that?" Tiffany stared at him, her mouth open in shock. What he had just said didn't make the slightest bit of sense. "I'm what? No, you can't be serious," Tiffany whispered, her voice barely audible. "From the moment he arrived in Colfax," Sean confirmed solemnly. Tiffany shrieked in horror. She fumbled to grab her cell phone from her purse and dialed a number, pressing 5A. Her rage boiled over when she heard the cheery message that the number had been changed or was no longer in service. As soon as Bobby's mother, Miss Kitty, recognized Tiffany's voice, her usual warmth turned to fury. "Don't ever call me again," she roared before hanging up abruptly. Desperate, Tiffany called Bobby's workplace. The receptionist answered in her usual cheerful tone, unaware of the storm brewing on the other end. "Bobby Hunt, please," Tiffany requested urgently. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Hunt is on his honeymoon," the receptionist replied cheerfully. "In Barbados, can you believe it?" No, that's not right. Please, Whitney, Courtney, please let me talk to him," Tiffany pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's Courtney," the receptionist corrected hesitantly. "What do you mean he's not on his honeymoon? I attended his wedding." Tiffany didn't respond. She simply disconnected the call. The drive back to Pam's house was filled with the oppressive quiet, broken only by Sean's country music playing softly on the stereo. When they arrived, Sean pulled up in front of their mother's house. We have an apartment," Tiffany murmured weakly. "No, Tiffany, no," Sean muttered grimly. "What part of divorce don't you understand? It's over." The 3 suitcases remained where Sean had left them, in the living room, on the couch. Tiffany trudged upstairs to her bedroom, collapsed on her bed, and stared blankly at the ceiling. An hour later, Pam found her daughter in the same position, her eyes fixed on nothingness. "What did you do?" Pam asked quietly, concern etched on her face. "Nothing," Tiffany protested weakly. "We're on our honeymoon. He'll cool off and come back." Debbie's husband, Nicholas, was an attorney specializing in estate planning, but he had also reviewed Bobby's divorce petition. "By the way, I brought one of your suitcases. Where are the others?" Nicholas inquired. "Over there," Tiffany mumbled, pointing vaguely. "Really?" Nicholas snapped as he tried to lift one of the suitcases. "Do you expect me to do your laundry, too?" But when Tiffany had the audacity to smirk at Pam's mention of Patrick leaving her, Pam did what she should have done when Patrick first met that spoiled brat. Nicholas turned away, barely concealing a satisfied smile, while Tiffany nursed her reddened cheek. "Counseling?" Bobby sighed as his attorney, Leon Holtmeyer, conveyed Tiffany's request. "It could strengthen your case in court," Leon remarked casually. "Who knows? You loved her enough to marry her once. Counseling might help." "One condition," Bobby interjected firmly. "Actually, 2 conditions. First, there needs to be a reasonable limit. Not endless sessions, not dragging this out indefinitely." 8 sessions. If it's beneficial, you can request more," Leon agreed. "And the second condition?" "She should undergo counseling for herself as well," Bobby insisted. Tiffany nearly retorted with a "screw you," but both Nicholas and Pam suggested it couldn't hurt. Nicholas selected Tiffany Benhurst as their counselor, a woman known for her strong feminist views and outspoken stance against men. "Honestly, I can't fathom why he doesn't want to be married to me anymore," Tiffany scoffed as she and Bobby sat in Dr. Benhurst's office. "Barbados was breathtaking. We should have been enjoying ourselves, and he decides he's leaving." "Wow. Just wow," Bobby responded, genuinely taken aback. "Is that really how you see it?" "Perhaps you can enlighten us, Mr. Hunt?" Dr. Benhurst interjected sharply. "How do you perceive these events?" "You say Tiffany, Michelle Church, and her daughter Brianna didn't die to ruin our honeymoon," Bobby explained. "Kevin Lightfoot's accident on Highway 43 caused delays. 3 lives were lost. Yet, Tiffany seems to overlook how that affected us." "Who?" both Tiffany's queried, confused. "That accident caused us to be late," Bobby clarified. 3 people lost their lives because of it, but Tiffany won't acknowledge how that impacted our plans. He turned to Tiffany, his expression pleading for understanding. "Remember? I looked it up on my phone when we got to our room. Remember what you said?" "So? That's what you said. So what? A 5-year-old girl is dead, and all you can say is, 'So what?'" Even Dr. Benhurst glanced at Tiffany, her expression tinged with disapproval. Tiffany decided to feign remorse. "I know, God, I can't believe how inconsiderate I've been," she purred. Bobby let her finish. Dr. Benhurst smiled encouragingly at Tiffany. "Uh-huh," Bobby said. "What were their names?" "Who? What names?" asked Tiffany. "The 3 men who died. What were their names?" Bobby clarified. Tiffany stared at him blankly, then turned to Dr. Benhurst, hoping for assistance. "And Dr. Benhurst, why did she hate Patrick Davis so much, huh?" Bobby continued, rising to his feet. "I never understood it. The man loved her mom, did everything for her, but Tiffany hated him like poison." "We still have 15 minutes," Dr. Benhurst interjected. "I need to get back to work," Bobby said tersely. "It'll take me at least 20 minutes to get there from here." He glanced at Tiffany as if about to say something, then abruptly headed for the door. "You were about to say something," Dr. Benhurst noted. "I was going to ask her why she picked a doctor across town, but then I realized it doesn't matter. None of it matters," Bobby said. "Ma'am? Mrs. Hunt?" the receptionist called as Tiffany emerged from the counselor's office 5 minutes later. "What?" Tiffany snapped. "Ma'am, the session fee is $140, please," said the receptionist. "What?" Tiffany exclaimed indignantly, slapping her Visa card down. If the receptionist was taken aback by her abrupt, aggressive demeanor, she hid it well. "And your individual session is Thursday the 9th at 9, the receptionist added pleasantly. "Easy to remember, 9 on 9. Whitney, the receptionist in Bobby's office, put Tiffany through to Bobby. Yes, he answered. You made me pay for it? Tiffany exclaimed. You wanted counseling. You pay for it, Bobby replied. Anything else? I'm working on an order. Need it by 4. Pam felt no sympathy for her daughter. She had her own issues. Day after day, she sent emails to Patrick, pleading for him to return home. His Facebook status still indicated he was married to Pam Davis. His last message, posted on Tiffany's wedding day morning, read, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." Pam wasn't sure if Patrick was referring to her or Tiffany. On the day of the wedding, her calls went straight to voicemail. By Sunday afternoon, his voicemail was full. By Monday morning, his number was disconnected, so Tiffany's problems were her own. She got herself into this mess. She could get herself out. 3 months after the wedding, Pam came home to find Tiffany had demolished 1 box of Girl Scout Thin Mints and started on a second. Pam started to say something, then shrugged. She didn't care. She just didn't care. There was a half-empty container of homemade Bluebell vanilla bean ice cream in the trash. I suppose I should be grateful you managed to get it in the trash, Pam commented. What's that supposed to mean? Snapped Tiffany bitterly. Well, usually you leave the empty container where you ate it for someone else to clean up, Pam retorted. As the date of the engineering convention approached, Jack Warner suggested they try to find Patrick Davis there. Despite his absence from social media, locating Patrick Aaron Davis wasn't difficult. Pam almost smirked. Patrick had turned up in DeGard, Louisiana. In DeGard, a detective agency had tracked down Michael James. Jack informed Pam that he and Patrick's boss, Joe Gaudette, had both attempted to persuade Patrick to attend the convention, but Patrick had adamantly refused. You're welcome to come with us anyway, Jack suggested. Who knows? Maybe he'll change his mind at the last minute. He won't change his mind, Pam replied, shaking her head. Pam, when was the last time you ate anything? Jack asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Pam looked haggard, her skin hanging loosely over her skeletal frame, and her hair unkempt. What? I had lunch 20 minutes ago? Pam snapped back. Debbie also expressed concern about Pam's appearance. Mom, you're losing weight faster than Tiffany is gaining weight, she remarked. Leave Tiffany alone, Sean interjected. Thanks, you're always on my side, Tiffany said, glancing at Nicholas. Can't help it. Jenny Craig gave up on her, Sean joked, which elicited laughter from both men before they shifted the conversation to the St. Louis Rams' upcoming trade to Los Angeles. Pam resolved not to hesitate any longer. She would swallow her pride and grovel if necessary. She needed to beg Patrick to come back home. The receptionist at St. Elizabeth's Hospital had such a thick Cajun accent that Pam requested to be transferred to someone in America. Ma'am, I'm right here in Louisiana, yeah, the receptionist retorted angrily. And where you at from, huh? Colfax, Missouri, Pam replied, holding back her frustration. May I speak to Patrick, please? He ain't here no more, the receptionist confirmed. Then may I speak to Mr. Gaudette? Pam asked. Oh, you mean Mr. Gaudette? The receptionist chuckled, pronouncing the name in the Cajun style as Gaudet. She placed Pam on hold. Joe Gaudette confirmed what the receptionist had told Pam. Patrick Davis had resigned and was no longer employed at the facility. From what I hear, he's gone to Oak Grove, somewhere in Texas, Joe added. It took a mild heart attack to jolt Pam out of her mental fog. One night, she woke unable to catch her breath. Initially dismissing it as a panic attack, minutes passed, and her breathing worsened, genuinely frightening her. Luckily, Tiffany was still awake downstairs in the living room, watching a movie and finishing a box of Crunch and Munch. She assisted her mother to the car, genuinely surprised by how weak Pam had become. Driving them to North Lake Hospital, Tiffany's resentment towards Patrick Davis resurfaced. 30 minutes after Tiffany's call, Sean arrived at the hospital. Debbie and Nicholas followed 40 minutes later, both looking somewhat groggy. Should I call Jack? Sean asked Tiffany. Jack? Tiffany queried. Her boss? Her friend? Come on, Tiffany, get with it, Sean snapped, calling Jack Warner himself. Exercise, diet, medication, standard prescriptions for a mild heart attack. Jack Warner stood at the foot of Pam's hospital bed, looking intensely at her. "Pull yourself together," he urged sharply. "Get it together, or you're out of a job." With that, he turned and strode purposefully out of the hospital room. "What a character," Tiffany remarked. "Mom, he's right," Debbie agreed. "You really need to take charge." Now sitting in her office, clutching her papers, Pam felt as though she might have another heart attack. Nicholas picked up the phone promptly. He knew Pam wouldn't call his office unless it was urgent. "Well, at least the waiting is over," he finally said. He called Mahlon Sue, Patrick's lawyer, and spoke with the young attorney. He agreed to represent Mrs. Davis in the lawsuit and provided Mahlon Sue with all his contact details. "Well, Pam," Nicholas began, to put it simply. "Any chance we could try counseling?" Pam interjected. "No, I'm afraid not," Nicholas admitted, bracing himself, hoping this news wouldn't precipitate another heart attack. After a long pause, he asked if she was still there. "Yes, I'm here," Pam replied, her voice devoid of energy. "Pam, I'm sorry, but Mahlon Sue said she's representing him in absentia. Besides, it's been over 3 years. Even if he lived down the street, no judge would agree to a meeting after so much time has passed," Nicholas explained gently. "Just one meeting, please." "Just one meeting with him," Pam pleaded desperately. Returning home, Pam retrieved the red dress that Patrick had always admired. But when she tried it on, she found it garish. It hung loosely on her slumped shoulders, and her figure seemed deflated. She called Claudette, her longtime hairdresser, and made an appointment. Then she went to the mall, hoping to find a dress that would accentuate her charms. "God, when did I get so old?" Pam groaned inwardly as dress after dress seemed to age her rather than enhance her beauty. "At least my legs are still nice," Pam muttered to herself, trying on yet another dress. "Yes," she overheard one salesman whisper to another. On the day of the meeting with Mahlon Sue of Upjohn, May and Associates, Pam and Nicholas were escorted into a tastefully furnished conference room. There were only 8 chairs around a heavy wooden table. The room felt intimate. "Coffee? Water?" asked their polite assistant. "You know what? Coffee with a splash of cream?" Nicholas requested. "Ma'am," the assistant smiled. "Decaf? And a bit extra?" Pam asked. "Certainly," the assistant agreed. She returned shortly with 2 steaming mugs. "I have one of those single-cup machines. I love it," she shared, placing the mugs on napkins. "A K-cup?" "Yes, just got it recently," Nicholas acknowledged. "Thank you," Pam said politely. "No problem," the assistant replied cheerfully. "Well, I'm certainly relieved that doing your job isn't a problem," Pam retorted sharply, as the door closed behind the assistant. She turned to Nicholas. "I really can't stand people who say no problem instead of you're welcome," she remarked tersely. "Anyway, have you thought about what you're going to say?" Nicholas asked. Pam wrestled with nerves, unsure if it was anxiety or perhaps even the onset of a heart attack. She had rehearsed this moment countless times over the past few years. Finally, she shook her head and forced herself to smile. "Why did I bring you along?" she mused aloud. Before Nicholas could respond, an attractive Asian American woman entered the room. Her long hair was intricately braided, cascading almost to the floor. She wore a smart suit that retained a feminine touch, and she greeted everyone with a warm smile before taking a seat across from them. Pam's heart skipped a beat when Patrick followed the lawyer into the room. Once a handsome young man, Patrick now exuded a mature charm with his tanned complexion and brown eyes. He had opted for casual attire, khaki pants paired with an off-white golf shirt, accessorized with a matching black belt and loafers. "My attorney informed me I didn't need to be here," Patrick stated bluntly as he settled into his chair. His expression remained impassive as he glanced at Pam. "But why did we get married, Pam? How long have we been married?" Patrick inquired, his tone neutral. This had often been a point of contention. Pam struggled to recall dates and numbers. When asked about their children's ages or the duration of their marriage, she habitually deferred to Patrick. Pam stared at Patrick, while Nicholas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. 11 years, Patrick answered before Nicholas could interject. We've been married for 11 years, since last month's 23rd, and I insisted to Melon Sue that this discussion should be private. You look good, Pam finally managed to say. Thank you. You look as beautiful as ever, Patrick replied politely. Pam appeared every bit of her 53 years. Crow's feet lined the corners of her eyes, deepening like talons. Wrinkles marked her forehead, and heavy bags sagged under her once bright blue eyes. Loose skin hung along her jawline, evidence of the passing years. Her arms appeared frail, with sagging skin that hinted at weight loss and inactivity. Her hair, styled as it always had been, seemed out of place on her now less vibrant face. So, how's it going? Pam stammered, trying to break the awkward silence. It's been fine, Patrick replied tersely, offering no further explanation. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Pam's face lit up. Oh, you're a grandfather, she exclaimed. Hey, congratulations, Patrick said warmly, turning to Nicholas. Oh no, not me, Nicholas corrected quickly. Tiffany, Patrick guessed. Yes, Tiffany, Pam confirmed. God help that poor child, Patrick muttered bitterly. But I thought you and Bobby were divorced? Patrick asked after a moment. We are, Nicholas confirmed. She's raising the baby on her own. Patrick, is there any chance? Pam trailed off, her voice trembling. Patrick exchanged a glance with his lawyer, who retrieved a folder from her briefcase and handed it to him. Pam, I loved you. I loved you with all my heart, Patrick said quietly, tapping his finger on the corner of a file folder resting on the polished desk. I loved you too, Pam agreed softly. Really? Really? Patrick's bitterness crept back into his voice. I did, and I still do, Pam said, her voice breaking. Then why, Pam? Patrick asked, opening the folder and pulling out a photograph of Pam and Michael locked in an intimate embrace. Pam's tears blurred her vision as Patrick flipped through more incriminating photos. One showed them entering a hotel room together. Another captured them in a passionate embrace at a rehearsal dinner. He was mine. We were married. Pam sobbed, unable to finish her sentence. And I could have overlooked all of that. It would have been difficult, but because I loved you so much. Patrick's voice thickened with emotion. But this, such blatant disrespect, in front of everyone? Several moments passed in heavy silence, broken only by Pam's labored breathing and occasional sniffling. Nicholas finally cleared his throat. Where did you get these? He asked, nodding toward the photos. I hired the private investigator that Pam hired to find Michael, Patrick replied, his eyes still fixed on Pam. Pam didn't look up. She simply shook her head. Another long silence hung in the air. Michael didn't just show up like Pam claimed, so I had him surveilled. It took less than a week, Patrick explained, gathering up the photos. We'd like to ask for counseling, Nicholas said weakly, breaking the heavy silence that followed. There wasn't really any chance, was there? Pam groaned, her voice thick with resignation. I'm sorry, Pam, Patrick said quietly, his expression strained. Pam's despair erupted into heartbreaking sobs. Patrick's face tightened with pain as he watched the woman he once loved crumble before him. Melon Sue moved towards the table to retrieve a box of tissues, but Patrick gently nudged Nicholas's hand with it. It was excruciating, Melon Sue remarked an hour later, after the emotional storm had somewhat subsided. He and Patrick sat in Melon Sue's office, waiting for the courier to arrive and collect the signed and notarized documents. Patrick's gaze drifted to an oriental engraving on Melon Sue's wall, its serene beauty offering a stark contrast to the turmoil in the room. When all of this started, Patrick began, his voice carrying a trace of weariness, I called Ben Upjohn, talked to him. Patrick sighed deeply, Melon Sue patiently waiting for him to continue. He wanted to go all out, scorch the earth, burn everyone in his path, Patrick recounted. Sounds like Ben, Melon Sue agreed knowingly. I just wanted to escape the pain, Patrick admitted, his gaze returning to the oriental print. I never understood how bankrupting Pam, taking every last penny from her, would ever numb that pain. I just wanted to get away, Patrick said quietly, his voice heavy with regret, to distance myself from the pain as much as possible. He stared at the oriental print again, its intricate details offering a silent refuge amidst the emotional turmoil. I just wanted to get away, Patrick said wearily, his voice tinged with resignation, just to separate myself from the pain as far away as possible. So why did you come? Melon-Sue asked, her gaze also drifting to the serene oriental print on the wall. I loved her. I still do, Patrick replied quietly. Melon-Sue nodded understandingly as the courier entered the office, collecting the signed documents before leaving again. I guess I felt I owed it to her, Patrick added, his tone reflecting a mix of duty and lingering affection. He rose from his seat, retrieving his motorcycle helmet from the nearby chair and pulling on his jean jacket while checking his keys in his pocket. Now, if you'll excuse me, Patrick said, a hint of weariness in his voice, there are a lot of highways between here and Texas. Louise entered the condominium with her heavily pregnant belly, setting down the day's mail on the counter with a sigh of relief as she slipped out of her shoes. Does Mommy need her feet rubbed? Patrick asked, greeting her warmly. You're pregnant. You're beautiful. And my God, you're glowing, Patrick added with affection. An envelope from Upjohn, May & Associates caught his attention. Patrick opened it, finding another envelope inside. In the upper left corner was an address sticker belonging to Tiffany James, bearing Pam's street address sent to the law firm. Louise noticed Patrick's expression darken as he read the contents. Sensing his distress, she stepped around the counter and gently touched his muscled bicep, leaning against him for support. But how can you even think of such things? God, I'm huge. I'm like a whale in here, Louise protested with a happy tone. You're pregnant, you're beautiful, and my God, you're stunning, Patrick corrected her warmly. An envelope from Upjohn, May & Associates caught his attention. Patrick opened it carefully, finding yet another envelope inside. In the upper left corner was a familiar address sticker bearing Pam's street address, sent by Tiffany James to the law firm. Louise saw Patrick's expression darken and immediately stepped around the counter. She gingerly touched his muscled bicep, leaning against him for support. What is it? She whispered softly. From my former stepdaughter, Patrick almost growled, his frustration evident. He glanced over the bank statement, utility bill, and a flyer from a toy store. Who doesn't know we're expecting? Patrick mused, eyeing the advertisements that confirmed their upcoming parenthood. Oh, look at the Scooby-Doo playset, Louise exclaimed happily. Later that evening, Patrick finally opened the envelope sent by Tiffany. He smirked at the formal Dear Patrick greeting. Oh, I'm sure you're just full of apologies, Patrick muttered as he began reading her words. He didn't make it past the first paragraph before the tone shifted from apologies to excuses for Tiffany's actions. Frustrated, he crumpled the single sheet of paper, glanced at the picture of the curly-haired girl, and tossed the letter, envelope, and photo into the wastebasket. Bobby insisted on a paternity test. It was humiliating, sitting in the doctor's office, staring at each other. Tiffany had promised to inform him of the results, but Bobby's response was a harsh, cruel laugh. Like I'm going to believe you, he scoffed. Dr. Nina Sue, an attractive Asian-American woman, entered the office with her professional smile and took her seat at her desk. Then she shattered Tiffany's hopes, crushing them into a million pieces. Goodbye, Bobby chuckled, patting Tiffany's head like she was a dog. No, are you sure? Tiffany whispered. I mean, Bobby's the only one I've ever... Even after the divorce, Bobby always came running whenever Tiffany called, claiming to be a little lonely. They would meet for dinner or drinks, which often ended up at his apartment. Bobby always insisted on condoms, but condoms aren't foolproof. Then Tiffany recalled one incident, just one. She was in the plus-size section of a department store, searching for pants. Her size 16 jeans were becoming too difficult to button. She had to lie down on the bed to fasten them. I bet black really suits you, one of the men suggested. Tiffany was about to tell him to back off and mind his own business. But when she turned around, there stood a living statue of David in front of her, a modern Michelangelo's work. The man was simply stunning. Curly dark hair, deep brown eyes, and the shadow of a 5 o'clock beard. "Yeah? But what kind of top would go with this?" Tiffany asked, placing her chubby hand on his muscular bicep. He helped her pick out a few pairs of pants and tops, and then carried everything into the fitting room. "Why is my granddaughter crying?" Pam soothed as she entered the baby's room. "Oh, why is my beautiful Gabrielle crying?" As self-centered as Tiffany was, seeing her mother still saddened her, Pam looked emaciated, with loose skin hanging off her limbs and her once beautiful face. After her second heart attack and early retirement, all Pam seemed to do was sit around and watch TV. Gabrielle appeared to be the only thing Pam lived for, but even that seemed to be slipping away.